So last weekend you might have seen that I went to Silverstone to watch the British Grand Prix, and I had an amazing time. I posted a few pictures on Instagram and here on YouTube, and a lot of you were asking whether I could talk about my experience and perhaps film a few bits whilst I was there. So I've done all that and I'm collating it in this video. Now I'm going to have a chat with you about Silverstone and what I think about attending the Grand Prix, and then some of the more tasty bits of the racing, so the sprint qualifying and then also the Sunday race. So if you want to go to a Grand Prix in the future, potentially Silverstone, carry on watching. So Silverstone isn't the easiest of places to get to. It's in Northamptonshire, which is about the East Midlands, which is nowhere near where I live. But the drive down was absolutely stunning. So when you're driving on the motorway, no matter which way you're coming from, it's just greenery. You're surrounded by the countryside. It is really beautiful and it really does set the scene, especially if you're having a couple of days holiday. For any of my international viewers, which I know there are quite a few of you of, the nearest airport, if you were looking to come to Silverstone, would be Birmingham. It's about an hour away from Birmingham, so it's not too bad and it is a really nice journey. So I travelled down on the Friday morning and I had tickets for Saturday's race. But the great thing about Silverstone is that there's tons of attractions nearby. So we went to the Cotswolds, it was my dad and we visited 3 of the villages there. Burt-on-the-Water, which is said to be the little Venice of England. We went to Broadway, which is a gorgeous village. It's meant to be the jewel of the Cotswolds. And we also went to Lower Slaughter, which is where they filmed the latest adaptation of Jane Austen's Emma. Now, the Cotswolds is just very quintessentially English. You really can't get any more English. So it's a great place, especially if you're in England for the first time, potentially, just to see what it's like and how beautiful some of the countryside can be here. But on to the bit you probably came here for. What's it like to go to Silverstone and see the British Grand Prix? So I stayed at a local travel lodge, which was about 7 minutes away from the track. What I will say, it's the same as if you're going to any Grand Prix. The prices, especially of accommodation, are incredibly inflated during that weekend. So the travel lodge that I was staying at, which is just a very basic budget hotel, is normally on a weeknight £25. Now for one night, so it was a Friday night to the Saturday morning, it was £270 for that one night, and it is very expensive for what it is. If you're going to a Grand Prix, I would say try and stay near the circuit, just because I know some people going to Silverstone last weekend that were travelling from Milton Keynes, and it took an hour and a half for them to get to the track, whereas it should have been about a 40-minute journey. So I got there for around 8:30, which was just in time to see the sprint race in F2, the first of the sprint races. And this was actually a really nice time to go because it wasn't that crowded when we were there. The grandstands were fairly socially distanced and you could get a real great view of the track from where we were on the Wellington straight stand. Also, watching F2, a lot of you will have seen last year, it can be sometimes more entertaining than watching the F1. And it was a great battle. I think it was Robert Schwartzman who won it, but on the opening lap, he overtook 2 cars before he'd even got to the first corner. He was in the lead. So it was brilliant to watch that, and there was a lot of drama. There was tons of safety cars. Jack Aitken had a pit lane exit issue. It was a really good race to watch, actually. So just for a bit of context, like I say, I was sat in the Wellington Straight stand, which is a decent place actually to watch any of the motorsports. So obviously the drivers are coming extremely fast down the straight, and then they have to slow because you have the corner of Brooklands, which you can see. It is quite good. You do see quite a bit of action there. A lot of the time the drivers are going side by side down the Wellington Straight and then trying to overtake into Brooklands. You can't see a lot more than that. I did get a question about whether you could see Luffield. You can't. It's very, very hard. You can just about see it, but you wouldn't be able to tell whether even someone had gone off the racetrack. But the Wellington Straight, it was part of the inner track access, which you do pay more for on top of your general admission. But for me, it was well worth it. It was undercover from the extreme heat of the day. So yeah, I would recommend it. So after the F2 had finished, it was time for F1 free practice 2. Quite odd to watch it on the Saturday, as usually it occurs on the Friday. However, I will say that I did enjoy it. Kind of prior to watching it, I was slightly concerned because logistically, I agree with the likes of Max Verstappen. It doesn't really make sense to have qualifying and then have a free practice the next day. But from a fan perspective, you're never going to say no to watching the race cars on track. And if there hadn't been a practice session, all we would have had was the half an hour sprint race, which isn't great when you're purchasing the Saturday tickets, which are more expensive than the Friday tickets. So I really enjoyed it. It was more crowded than the F2, but it was still pretty spaced out in the stands, and there was a great atmosphere. It kind of just started to build up at that time. And obviously with the free practice, there'll be cars doing kind of fast laps and slow laps, so you can get a really good view of the cars. It was quite interesting because I kind of went into this year's F1 thinking that I really liked the Mercedes livery and the Aston Martin livery, and on track I was actually quite impressed by the McLaren livery. That bright orange really does stand out. And in all honesty, now I'm probably going to get hate for this, but the Haas livery wasn't actually that bad in reality. It is quite striking, the white, so everything stands out, and you can literally see, like, even if they're going 180 miles per hour down the Wellington Straight, you can see Haas written on the side of the car, which for some of them, it just completely blends into the livery. So, but it was great to see free practice too, and to see the cars when they were doing slow laps and really get a good look at them. So one of the highlights for me actually of the weekend was watching the W Series race. Now, I know the W Series can be quite controversial. If you don't know what it is, it's effectively an all-female single-seater series. They drive F3 cars and they race against each other. And the idea is it is a feed series to get these women into Formula One. Now, like I say, it has caused a bit of controversy because in normal karting and in normal single-seaters, females are expected to go up against males, and some people disagree with the fact that you segregate the genders in this series. And I have to say, when it first was announced, again, I was kind of on the more sceptical side. I didn't understand why you had to split the genders up because, if they make it to Formula One, you will have to race against men. But after watching the Channel 4 documentary and then seeing the W Series kind of in reality, obviously motorsport is heavily skewed towards males, and this series really does give women the chance to show their talent, and it allows them to enter the sport when they, maybe have struggled in the past to get sponsorship, testing days, find an engineer for testing days. This encapsulates it all into one, and it's a free to enter series. And I was actually really impressed with the W Series and watching the race there. The British girls, Alice Powell and Jamie Chadwick, I thought was superb, and they really put out good performances, especially Alice Powell, who initially lost her pole position start on the first lap, I think it was, and then she managed to regain it by the end of the race. So it was really good to see, and I would recommend, if you're going to a Grand Prix and there's W Series there, definitely stay in the stands and watch it. You won't be disappointed. It's pretty entertaining actually to watch. So then after the F1 finished, there was even more racing with F2. It was the second sprint race, and it was really good to watch because it was slightly less dramatic than the first, but the incident between Deleda and Beauchamp was, again, kind of like added a bit of spice to it. And then it was great to see the talent that is Richard Verschoor, who, is coming through hopefully to F1 in the future, and he did a supreme race. So it was really nice to see actually these talented drivers that, you're going to see in the future for Formula One perform at such a great level, and it was a good race to watch. So then it was time for the big one. It was the sprint qualifying, which has never been done before in Formula One. If you don't know what sprint qualifying is, or just for a refresher, Sprint qualifying is effectively a race where the drivers do not pit. It is high intensity and it's non-stop. The drivers tend to do about 100 kilometres, which in Silverstone terms was 17 laps, and it usually takes about 25 to 30 minutes to complete the race. So points are awarded for the top 3 finishers, with 3 points for the first, 2 points for second, and 1 point for third, which may not seem like a lot, but I think especially with this year's championship, every point really does matter. And I think that's actually kind of what was in its favour, because the race could have been potentially boring. You know, drivers wouldn't necessarily want to risk their car and push all out when they know they have the Grand Prix the next day. But because, like I say, there's this point at stake and points are everything at the minute in this current championship, everyone, I've got to say, every driver was pushing. And again, it was really great to see on the Saturday to have a race to watch. And from a fan perspective, you know, if you can't afford to necessarily watch the Grand Prix on the Sunday, this is a really great alternative. Again, the atmosphere for this race was superb. People were singing Sweet Caroline in the stands. There was air horns. Everyone was screaming when Hamilton, Russell and Norris went past, which is obviously something you definitely do not get when you're watching the TV. So for this race, I watched part of it up in the grandstand and part of it down on the inner track in one of the viewing areas. I'd say definitely for viewing purposes, it's much better up on the stands. You get a better view of the track overall. However, when you are literally standing next to the track, you definitely get a feel for how fast some of the cars are going and how much the drivers are really pushing. I also quite enjoyed seeing the victory parade lap with Valtteri Bottas, Hamilton and Verstappen. I thought it was actually a real nice touch. It was great to see kind of the drivers in real life going past. I know some people weren't keen on it and it might have looked a bit awkward, but from a fan perspective, I think it was a really good addition to the race day. Now, do I think that the sprint race is a good addition to the racing calendar? I'm a bit torn, I'll be honest. Parts of the sprint race were very good. You know, you had the battle between Daniel Ricciardo, Lando Norris, Fernando Alonso. You had Max Verstappen's overtake at the start on Lewis Hamilton. But the only problem with, and I don't know whether this is probably more of a Silverstone issue or whether it's a sprint race issue, is that after that initial overtake between Verstappen and Hamilton, the front four really did spread out and there was such a gap between them that there was no chance of overtaking. And with it being 17 laps and no pits, you couldn't particularly expect any battles to go ahead. So I think after about lap 9, it started to become a bit processional, the race in general. But like I say, it offers people on a Saturday the opportunity to watch a race rather than just having to go on the Sunday. So I'm excited to kind of watch the likes of Monza and then wherever the third sprint race ends up being. So I'll reserve my judgment for now, but I'm a bit 50-50 on whether I want to see it on next year's calendar. As for what else you could do when you were there, I thought that the fan zone was very well set up. You could try out the simulators, Quadrant were there, WTF1, Veloce. It was very busy that though, so if you want to try the simulators and some of the more interactive activities, be prepared to queue. There was also this section where they were showing off some of the other cars. So there was Lando Norris's Gulf livery from Monaco, which was great to see in reality. There was the original car driven by Sir Sterling Moss, which was the Mercedes Benz 300 SLR. Again, great to see in reality. And there was also another Mercedes F1 car. I want to say it was the 2018 model. I might be mistaken on that. It was also great having the inner track tickets because at the start of the day, as the drivers were coming into the paddock, you could wave. They couldn't stop because of coronavirus restrictions. However, I saw Alonso, George Russell, he did slow down and say hi. Who else I see? Sebastian Vettel, got a clip of him cycling in. There was also Bottas and I believe Pierre Gasly. Just saw him briefly go past, and I think Lewis Hamilton also went past in his G-Wagon. So quite a few of you had some questions that you wanted me to answer. You left them on Instagram and YouTube, so thank you very much for those. I'm going to rattle through them now. So the first question's from Andy. He says, pros and cons of watching at the track versus TV. Major pro, atmosphere. You can't beat people singing Sweet Caroline, screaming, seeing the cars on track, having the opportunity to watch these incredibly talented sportsmen perform at such a high level. You cannot beat. The con is that you do see more action on TV. So they have TVs around the grandstands, but you're so focused on what's happening on track, you're not really paying attention to the TV. So I definitely did have to watch the race again. Also, another con is just how expensive it is. It is ridiculously expensive. The accommodation, the food whilst you're there. It's definitely not an affordable day out, but it is an experience. So if you have the money and you're saving up, it is well worth it. You'll really enjoy it, but do be warned, it is very expensive. Okay, NASCAR National said, opinion on Max and Lewis's crash on Sunday. Where do we start? I mean, I'll be honest, when I first watched the footage, I thought racing incident. Neither Verstappen or Hamilton are relenting going into Cop's corner. Neither of them were going to give each other space. So, I thought initially racing incident. Looking back, I do think it was a bit of a cheeky move from Hamilton. I can understand the 10-second time penalty. I saw some people saying that Hamilton had the corner and had the line. I'm not so sure. I think it was pretty even. But yeah, I think it was a fair penalty, and I don't think there'd have been much as an uproar had it been further down the grid. It's just that the championship is so close this year between Verstappen and Hamilton that any move like that is always going to kind of cause a bit of a debate online and is going to cause friction and a bit of chaos. The next question comes from Drew. He said, will you be as sunburned as some of the other British commentators who went to the race? Absolutely not. I was factor 50, slathered all over me, so I am not sunburned, thank God. But it was so hot, especially in the grandstand where there's like hundreds of people around you. It was very hot, but no, I'm not sunburned, so that's good. So KND438 says, what corner do you think is best to watch at? I was sitting at Chapel for the race and Beckett and the Hamilton Straight for quali and sprint. I still can't 100% decide where I'd sit next year, though definitely somewhere with a roof next time. Definitely somewhere with a roof. It was so hot, and also it could rain at any point. This is Britain. I would say that I think Luffield is probably the best place. You get a lot of action there. And you can see the cars. You have quite a good view going down to Cops. You can also see from Brooklands. You can also see a little bit of the Wellington Straight. So I'd pick Luffield next time. But, if you're really pushing the boat out, maybe the hospitality section at Brooklands. But, I'd say Luffield it would be for me. Okay, so Josh asks, has Ricciardo got his mojo back? Great weekend for Ricciardo. I thought it was actually a really good weekend for McLaren overall. He finished 5th, I think, on Sunday's race, Ricciardo. Has he got his mojo back? The McLaren car is kind of like notoriously quite difficult to drive, I believe. I know Carlos Sainz said he found it harder to adapt to the McLaren than he has done the Ferrari. I think that if Ricciardo kind of carries on with his kind of in that 5th, 4th potentially, I would say he would have his mojo back. I think we've got a few more races until we can officially say that, but it's one where I think he needs to beat Lando Norris in order to fully say that he's kind of back in a similar position that he was at Red Bull a couple of years ago. But a great weekend for Ricciardo, a great weekend for McLaren. So Askanda asks, opinion on Schumacher's performance. He was at the back. It's the Haas car. You can't expect a lot from it. They've done no development on it this year. They're focusing completely on 2022. So you kind of expect them to be at the back. I wouldn't have expected a higher position. I wouldn't have expected them to finish higher than Williams or Alfa Romeo. The other thing I would say, and I think this is a fair criticism for both Schumacher and Nikita Mazepin, is they really need to stop colliding with each other. There's no need. They're fighting for 19th and 20th place. They're not fighting for points. I understand that they are both in their rookie years and they want to prove that they're better than the other. But I don't think it's a good look, particularly on either of them. But Schumacher, I think, is a good driver. There have been definitely, where the car has allowed it, elements of brilliance. So, yeah, I'd say it was a poor weekend for Haas and Schumacher especially, but it's one race out of 23 this year. It's nothing to worry about. Mauricio, I want to say, he says, Red Bull's massive race disappointment. Yeah, it really was. Sergio Perez had an torrid time at the Silverstone this year. He spun out, didn't he, in the sprint qualifying, and then just couldn't really regain any places during the race. Yeah, a bit of an odd one for Perez. Obviously, he took the did he take the fastest lap in the end? I'm not sure about that, but I know he tried to. But yeah, really disappointing race weekend. It had so much potential for Max Verstappen as well after the sprint qualifying. At least it's made it interesting going ahead for this year. Yeah, no, that is everything. But thank you so much for asking me those questions. It really is great to have you interact with me and have a little bit of a debate and some comments. But yeah, going forward, I'm hoping to do a few more videos this summer, especially during the summer break. So look out for those. Maybe a few more fun ones as well. You never know, I might end up doing a training as a F1 driver or something like that. But thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. It was a bit more of a rambly and chatty video style than normal. But if you did enjoy it, please make sure you give it a like and you subscribe for future content. And I'll see you next time. Bye.